Okay everyone, so I'm going to talk about some of the potential long-term implications of the current crisis. Now again, just as I said in my last video about oil, nobody really knows what's going to happen, of course, long-term, politically or otherwise, and how it could affect people's wealth. But one thing that I wouldn't say it concerns me, but it's something that everyone who has assets should be aware of. I do think there could be a political blame game in some Western countries in the next few years. Because if you look at what's happened since the crisis, you've got a situation where even though short term all businesses were affected, some of the online digital businesses that were already doing well before the crisis are doing better than ever. So you've got Amazon, you've got Netflix and so on. But even when it comes to some of the smaller online businesses, so for example, anyone who has an online school, an online advisory company, an online consulting business, maybe an online legal business, whatever, anything online, many of those companies are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I was speaking to one gentleman who he's an owner of an online pet store, and he was saying that demand has gone up by 2 or 3 times and he basically can't keep up with the demand. So you've got a situation where the virus and the lockdown is exacerbating those existing inequalities in the world economy. In addition to that, you have a situation where government spending and government borrowing in most developed countries is going higher and higher and higher. And of course, politicians always look for a scapegoat. So imagine in a few years' time, Jeff Bezos and some of the other people have now got, instead of having 130, 140 billion, they have 200, 250 billion. You have many small and medium businesses, a small percentage of them making more and more money, but most are struggling. You could imagine that would be fertile ground for some kind of irresponsible politician to come along and say, well, what we need to do is kind of tax the rich, tax the wealthy, when in reality, as I said a few videos ago, the best entrepreneurs often pivot. So, for example, I can remember 3-4 years ago, I went to many networking events, face-to-face events, and I said to many people, and many people agreed with me, and I said, well, look, online is clearly the future. And of course, you didn't exactly have to be a futurologist 3 or 4 years ago, even though nobody could predict the future. That was clearly where the travel was going. But many naysayers said, oh yes, online is maybe perfect for most industries, but for law or finance or this or that, no. For high trust services, it won't take over. Now, of course, they were proven wrong, but what I'm saying is many of those people are now saying, oh, look at this online world, it's exacerbating the inequalities. But the point I'm making is, if they would have pivoted sooner, they would now be doing well. Same in other industries. I was talking to a friend of mine who has become an online teacher, and he's doing better than he ever has done before because he went online. And the same with all industries. I'm not saying everyone can be online, but you're getting the point I'm making, that some people might look for scapegoats in a few months or a few years if the general inequality goes higher and higher and higher. Rather than people looking at their own behavior and their own choices, they're more likely to blame the big boys like Amazon, Bezos or whatever, but they might start blaming people in their network as well and say, oh, you know what, that guy or that woman, they made money from the crisis because, I don't know, they were an online business or something. So the point is, when it comes to your own personal wealth, whether you're a business or an individual wealth, I think the current crisis and the general political direction always shows you should have your eggs in more than one basket. People always get their fingers burned when they just have one business in one legal location, and they're always amazed when something happens, like in Venezuela or in Egypt or in Tunisia, when basically things go bad. So it's always good to diversify your options and always good to have an exit strategy. I know as an entrepreneur, even if you've been successful for 20, 30, 40 years in one location, even if you're in Singapore or Norway, you should always remember that something very bad could happen. So you should always prepare for black swans. You should always have, other options. I always say to entrepreneurs, it's always good to have a second company, a third company, a second bank account, a third bank account, different investments in different places. So wealthy people do have to be prepared probably for a change. I wouldn't say even a change, but a heightening of the kind of political tensions, this kind of very big gap between, say, the socialists and the free marketeers, that the kind of polarization of politics. This isn't supposed to be a political video, and I'm not taking sides, although it should be obvious that obviously I'm on the side of someone who's free market. But the point is, as an entrepreneur, somebody who anyone who has any kind of money, even if you're a middle class person who has 100 grand here, 100 grand there, you should always be prepared for the political landscape to change, and never imagine as an entrepreneur, for example, you could be completely apolitical and completely ignore the political landscape. That doesn't mean you should talk about politics publicly or whatever, but it does mean that you have to be prepared that in the future there could be some pretty big changes when it comes to tax, business rates, and all those kind of things. So when it comes to protecting your wealth, I would always have what I would call a black swan plan. Ask yourself some simple questions. If this happened today, what would I do? And that's something that very few people did when it came to this crisis. Very few people, business owners, restaurateurs, hoteliers, said to themselves, look, if there's a terrorist attack, or if there's a big pandemic, and you know what, we can't open business because governments basically have a shutdown, how are we going to make money? Very few people played that in their heads, right? But not just restaurateurs and hoteliers, no matter what your industry, you should always ask yourself some very simple questions to make sure you can be prepared for what's always going to be an uncertain future. We've always lived in an uncertain world. Those periods of calm always come and go.